So tonight what I'd like to do is explore more, and this is something I try to do fairly regularly, this very pervasive tendency we have to sense I'm not enough or something's wrong with me, and to have a critique or a judgment or a sense of blame that's sometimes subtle and sometimes creates anguish. So I want to explore that. Because what I'm aware of is that not being able to forgive ourselves, whether it's the small stuff or the big stuff, not forgiving prevents intimacy. We can't be intimate with others, and we certainly can't be intimate and embodied and fully alive in our own being. Not forgiving gets in the way of being really fully who we are. So the next few talks, I'm going to talk tonight about not forgiving ourselves, and next week about the ways that we create separation from others, and then on the solstice we'll explore the real flowering of loving kindness. So we're going to kind of end the year, these 3 classes, on what really frees our heart. You know, what is it that frees our heart? And in the Buddhist tradition, the practices of forgiveness are the precursor to loving kindness. That our heart is not free to love in an open way if we're holding on to resentment and blame. You can look at the self-forgiving as a kind of therapeutic process. We have these tangles and we're working on that level. But what I'd really like, the frame I'd like to have us consider is that in the deepest way, when we commit to forgiving, to letting go of the story and the blame we have that we aim towards ourselves, we undo the most deep holdings that sustain a sense of separate self. That really the whole, if there's a goal to spiritual life, it's to realize who we are. It's to come home to a totality of being and a sense of connectedness that is beyond this story we live in that's so limiting about who we are. And the lack of self-forgiveness holds that story together. It's like as long as we're judging ourselves, we stay in that tight sense of self. So it's a life process, and we can explore intention and the ways that we loosen the grip. But the first inquiry is, how come we're so addicted to self-blame? And do those words resonate? Do you feel like we're addicted to self-blame? I'm just going to look around the room. Just nod if you think, if those words connect. Okay, I see. I don't see very well, but I saw some nodding. So first to say that if you just look at the way our bodies are designed and our nervous system and our brain and just evolution, the activity of having an unpleasant experience and seeking a target, looking for a cause, is part of our orienting process. I mean, all living creatures, when they feel something's unpleasant, try to figure out the source of that unpleasantness and get rid of it. So targeting and blaming is built into our nervous system. In a way, meditation instructions, like open to what's unpleasant and be with it, is kind of a recipe for extinction, you know, in terms of our early evolutionary brain. I mean, acceptance would not be considered adaptive, right? I mean, you accept unpleasant. The unpleasantness is supposed to be a signal to go do something about it and change it. And in reality, our own errors, the things we do that are mistakes, and the mistakes of others have consequences. And, if we have a habit of daydreaming or being distracted and we change lanes without noticing, that we've just cut off another car, or if we in some way are not taking an important medication that we're supposed to, if we have too many drinks and we're not sensitive to our spouse, or we lose track of if we're in the mall with a youngster and the youngster wanders off. In other words, if we are not alert, sensitive here, it can cause trouble. And so it's wise discrimination to say, oh, I really need to watch out for that. I need to be more alert when I'm with this child. I need to not drink that second drink, whatever it is. That's called wise discrimination. There's a difference between wise discrimination and aversive blame. And what we find, and what is pervasive in our culture, is that rather than recognizing what needs attention and responding, we have a very deep, intense overreaction of aversive blame that we aim at ourselves or others. So if it was tens of thousands of years ago and there's unpleasantness and something comes at us, it would be a physical threat, and we're supposed to feel that anger and lash out or run, and fight, flight makes sense. Most of our fighting, flighting is now psychological. And not only is it just psychological, it's an overreaction. It's based on things that are associated to what's happening from the past, but aren't necessarily the case right now. But we keep creating, because we react, we keep recreating our predicament. So I'm going to ground this a little bit in some examples, but the key tool we use for fighting and flighting is, our storyline of what's wrong. And we keep repeating it. We have this narrative where we keep telling ourselves, this is what's wrong with me. This is what needs to change. This is what needs to be better. And the Buddha called this the second arrow. And I talk about the second arrow a lot because the more we're aware of it, we start recognizing how many moments something will be going on. We'll feel afraid, or we'll feel jealous or depressed, or having a craving, or we'll have an addictive behavior. And we'll add on to that the second arrow of, and I'm bad for this. And if you don't see the second arrow, you cannot heal the source of the suffering. If you're locked into, I'm bad because of this. I did this behavior and I'm bad. I have these feelings and I'm bad. I'm having these thoughts and I'm bad. And I'm bad just means whatever aversive experience we feel. We can't awaken the kind of attention that actually will heal the knot, the tangle, the wound that needs our attention. So to ground this, and these 3 weeks I'll be drawing, the themes will be drawing on this second section of my book of True Refuge, The Gateway of Love. The book's divided into the Gateway of Truth, the Gateway of Love, and the Gateway of Awareness. And as many of you know, it's coming out January 22nd. So now is a really good time for me to start taking some of the stories and including them more actively in my talks. And so in one situation that I wanted to share, and this is a second arrow story, the main message is that true healing and transformation never comes out of shoulds. It doesn't come out of condemning ourselves. We cannot condemn ourselves into a wholesome kind of change. And so one man I was working with, he's in the business world, and executive, had a very bad temper and took it out on people, employees, and in the worst case, his family. And one particular incident really got him. That's what got him talking to me a lot, was that his wife had a biopsy, and she was supposed to get the results on a Friday. He got home on Friday evening from work. He saw a package that he had asked her to mail, still not mailed, and he completely exploded and he forgot to ask her about the biopsy results, which turned out that the biopsy was okay. But it was like that was so horrific for him, that level of insensitivity. So he really wanted to work with his anger, and he came to a meditation retreat. And at we had an interview. He said to me that, he described how much he hated himself, and he said, "I hate the beast inside me. It's ruining my life and it's hurting loved ones." And so a pause and a commentary here. Whenever I teach about acceptance and forgiveness, there are always people that ask that question, but wait a minute, if I am destroying my life with binge eating, isn't that wrong? Or if I'm hurting or violating somebody, isn't that bad? Why should I let myself off the hook? There's a sense that there's something bad that needs to be punished. And, doesn't self-forgiveness condone the shadow? So I want to just name that's the objection. Some of you might remember Jack Handey saying, "The first thing was I learned to forgive myself. Then I told myself, go ahead and do whatever you want. It's okay by me." So what is that? Is that what we're saying? Is it resignation? Like we're afraid, well, if I forgive myself, that's like resigning to bad stuff inside me. And then we've got Yogi Berra saying, "I never blame myself when I'm hitting. I just blame the bat. And if it keeps up, I change bats. After all, I know it isn't my fault that I'm not hitting. How can I get mad at myself, So that's the objection. That's the fear. That we're going to get soft on ourselves and we'll never become the person we want to be. So with this guy, his name was Sam, he was talking about hating the beast inside him, and I asked him, well, does hating the beast help? Has it helped you? And what do you think he said? He conceded that no. It wasn't helping. And our wisdom knows this. Even though there's something in us that says, I shouldn't let myself off the hook, we also know that when we get down on ourselves, it doesn't inspire us in any way. It doesn't bring about a healing transformation. And we know that with the justice system, that a punitive justice system does not then release people that are, healed some and ready to enter the world of the society. And in education, we know when kids are in some way put down for how they're doing things, it does not motivate them to develop their brand of intelligence. There are so many. And we know in spiritual life that, you can't the Buddha tried to do it. The Buddha tried to, first do all these austerities, and he was very punishing to his body. It didn't work, trying to overcome senses. In this story, there were these, a Catholic priest, a Baptist preacher, and a rabbi are friends, and they're kind of competing to see. They get together a few times a week for coffee, and they get competitive about how they each do different things. So they set up this real competition. They're all going to go out into the woods. They're going to find a bear, preach to it, and attempt to convert it. Okay, this is the setup. Here's what comes. Okay, so they do this, and they each do their thing, and they come back in 7 days to share their experiences. So first we got Father Flannery. He's got his arm in a sling. He's on crutches, various bandages. He goes first. Well, I went into the woods to find me a bear. When I found him, I began to read to him from the catechism. Well, that bear wanted nothing to do with me and began to slap me around, so I quickly grabbed my holy water, sprinkled him in Holy Mary, Mother of God. He became gentle as a lamb. Bishop's coming out next week to give him First Communion and Confirmation. That's Father Flannery. Reverend Billy Bob spoke next. He was in a wheelchair, had one arm and both legs in casts and an IV drip. He goes, well, brothers, you know that we don't sprinkle. I went out and I found me a bear, and I began to read to my bear from God's holy word, But that bear wanted nothing to do with me, so I took hold of him and we began to wrestle. And we wrestled down one hill and up another and down another until we came to a creek. So I quickly dunked him and baptized his hairy soul. And just like you said, he became gentle as a lamb. We spent the rest of the day praising Jesus. Hallelujah. Okay, so that's Reverend Billy Bob. Okay, so the priest and the reverend both looked down at the rabbi who's lying in a hospital bed. He was in a body cast and traction with IVs and monitors running in and out of him. He was in really bad shape. The rabbi looked up and said, well, looking back on it, circumcision might not have been the best way to... So our theme here was punitive measures don't work. But if you look at what happens when we go to war against ourselves, I mean, when there's self-aggression, because it is self-aggression, and when we're going to practice together in a few moments, and I want to say that this self-aggression, it doesn't have to be the very overt kind of blaming of, really getting on our cases in a heavy-handed way. Sometimes it's the light stuff where we just, on some level, are always feeling like we didn't do it quite right. It wasn't enough. Something's missing. So self-aggression, when it happens, the mind narrows. It's more closed down. Lose some access to creativity and resourcefulness. In other words, you're not aggressive toward yourself and at the same time creative and resourceful. They don't go together. And it's not just mental, there's a physical component with all stress reactivity where there's constriction in the body. It's felt in the chest area. Sometimes it's numbness you feel, sometimes heat or pressure, but there's tension. So when we are down on ourselves, to different degrees, there's a closing down of the flow of energy. And that's a really important point because there's kind of an armoring that becomes habitual in the body that we move around with when we're attacking ourselves. Now, the reason I'm saying that's really important is what I've come to realize in working on forgiveness is that if it's not an experience that happens in our bodies, in other words, if we can't feel the blame and feel the anger and feel the process in our bodies, it actually, it's only partial. It's not really freeing. Because if you look closely, what is the process of releasing blame? If you just kind of pay attention to it, the only way to release blame is to contact the tension that's living in the body. In other words, you have to hear the story of what's wrong, but then feel where it's living in the body with a mindful presence. And then there's a thawing that's possible. And the thawing really affects the heart. So you have to contact the anger and the fear and the felt sense of badness and the shame with a mindful presence, and there's this kind of relaxing. Mindfulness creates space, and in that space energy begins to flow and the heart opens. So even a small amount of mindful presence in the midst of self-blame, even if some part of you goes, okay, blaming myself, let's just be present, opens up some space so there's some alternative possibilities. Now, what happens is that when we decide, okay, I want to start forgiving myself, we know that we've got certain places that feel really unforgivable. And most of us have a few things that are really, really hard to let go of. And that can take repeated work, coming back to again and again with that mindfulness until we really get familiar with the way it's gripping and we feel it from the inside out, and there are different strategies for loosening it. But there's also the everyday blame. And everyday blame is something, it's kind of like each day we move through the day and there's these little ways that we hold against ourselves. And it's like accumulating this coating of gunk. Pay attention. It's like we accumulate these layers of caked on stuff that if we each day just run a kind of stream of at least the intention to forgive, begins to clear it and free ourselves. So I do something I call a forgiveness scan, and I thought we'd start with that as the first practice, which is lighter. It's not, you're not going to be going at the big stuff with this one, okay? So I see you already setting yourself in a sitting position. Sit in a way that is helpful to you to be attentive. And the way I like to begin the forgiveness scan is just a first scan for tension in the body. To forgive means to let go of what we're holding on to. We're holding on to blame, anger, or hatred. Forgiving is to let go of the armoring. So you can do a sweep through your body and just gently, the forgiveness sweep begins by just letting go of the tension, the somatic expression of mental tension, by softening in the shoulders, relaxing the hands. You might breathe in and out of the heart area, just feel the heart, and just sense a softening there. Feel the aliveness there. And loosening the belly. And then just sense today. Let yourself just bring your mind to today. And as if you're watching a kind of a home movie of yourself moving through the day, just notice if there were any places today where you got caught in that storyline of falling short, where you started holding something against yourself in some way for some interaction with somebody, some way of behaving, maybe an addictive behavior, something about how you were at work, with children, with a partner. So just notice if there's anywhere that you were logging demerits. You're down on yourself in some way. And whenever you encounter one of those, whatever you're down on yourself for, just see if you can feel where it lives in your body, the feeling of something's wrong. And simply, this is what I mean by the waters of forgiveness, just have the intention to forgive that. You might simply say, forgiven, forgiven. Because the intention is what you can bring to this right now. So there's some kindness in your heart that just doesn't want to keep carrying things against yourself. Doesn't want to have your armoring of second arrows. So whatever you notice from today where you might be holding against yourself for anything, just mentally whisper, forgiven, forgiven, or whatever words it may be accepting. Maybe the word forgiveness triggers off things for you. Then you might just sense acceptance, acceptance, accepting. Yes, it's okay. There might be something going on inside you right now. Maybe you're having a hard time doing this exercise. Then you can do forgiven, forgiven to that. So you start getting that everything can fit within this heart space of forgiven, forgiven. That your intention is not to hold anything against yourself. Now, if you hit something where there's self-blame that has very deep roots, like one of your big issues, just bow to it and just know that that's, again, your intention is to embrace your life. Forgiven, forgiven. Just honor that it's difficult. And notice what happens inside you when your intention is to be kind. Genetics, early life wounding, there's so many causes. We didn't sign up for our particular constellation of neurosis and the behaviors that we really don't like. We didn't sign up for them. So it's not your fault. When I said that to Sam, he began to weep deeply, and I'll tell you more what came out of that. But just to say that saying it's not my fault is actually what will allow us to be able to respond. It's not like we become irresponsible. We actually, by taking out that arrow of blame, we become able to respond. Now, background, I posted this online. Some of you might have seen it. The story of, if you're familiar with it, our Buddha right here, which is that another teacher from our community and I were up in New England, and we were looking for a Buddha for this class. And this is the one we found right here behind me. And I really loved it. She did too. And I remember one day after class, I was kind of standing in the back of the room, and I saw a group of people standing in front of it, and they were all kind of like this, leaning over to the left. And it turns out that this Buddha is made in a cast that's not upright. It leans to the left. Or it leans to the right, but when you're looking at it, it's to the left. I don't want to make meanings out of which way it leans. So we have a leaning Buddha here, and over time, for many people, it became a wonderful metaphor for us that we all have. We didn't design our castes. We all are, created from many different streams of conditioning, and we're all leaning. We're all imperfect. And the question is, can we learn to respond wisely to what's going on from a depth of our being beyond ego? The ego can't control it, but there is the who we are beyond the ego that can respond in a way that's profoundly healing. That response becomes possible when when the ego can realize it's not my fault, when there's not that self-blame. So with Sam, it motivated him to deepen his attention when it was this release, like, okay, I don't have to hate myself for it. It's not my fault. So now let me deepen my attention. And it was hard because the feeling of being bad is so deep in our body. It's not just a thought in the mind. It's a holding in the body, in the flesh. So we did a guided meditation together, what we call applied mindfulness, which many of you have done through these evenings here, are listening to the podcasts. And the guided meditation was I had him bring up a situation with his wife when he first walked in the room. I had him rerun it. And there's the unmailed letters. And I said, okay, so what were you believing and feeling in that moment that you saw the unmailed letters? And he said, well, there's anger, and the belief is, I'm not important to her. She doesn't respect me. If I was important to her, if she cared about me, she wouldn't have forgotten to do that because that mattered to me. So his complex equivalents for being worthy and important and loved were that she would have done that. And then he felt that in his body, that sense of, okay, not important to her, and how does that feel? And it was the feeling of shame. It was the feeling of a real core flawedness. So this is where it has to be embodied, how to really feel it and really get the pain of that. And then I had him look through the eyes of wisdom. I said, just, okay, how would someone that is understanding and kind look at you? And what would their response be? And he'd say the response would be, I'm suffering, and just to offer compassion in those moments. So do you see, he went from anger to hating himself from the anger initially, that was his looping, to anger, and then unpack it with mindfulness, feel where it lives in the body, find the shame underneath it, the powerlessness, and then there's the possibility for compassion, which is self-forgiveness. It's not my fault is the key here, because the it's my fault keeps on fueling the armoring. We cannot come to the tenderness of our hearts. So for Sam, there were many rounds where he would feel anger or feel down on himself and have to pause and keep unwrapping it like I described in his body. His biggest supporter was his wife, because the more he regarded his inner life with mindfulness and understanding, the more sensitive he became to her. But he had to see he was suffering. So the alchemy of self-forgiveness is that we have to contact the suffering that's underneath the thing we're not forgiving. Whether it's addiction or anger or being insensitive to other people or being fearful or being selfish or whatever it is we don't like ourselves for. If you've hurt somebody and you're having a hard time forgiving yourself for it, find out the fear and confusion that lived under that hurtful behavior. Now for one woman, and this is a woman who was, and I share this in True Refuge too. She was a prisoner in a maximum security prison, and she took a Buddhist meditation course taught by a friend. Now, this is a woman that's over 6 feet tall, and large woman, bright dyed red hair, and tattoos all over her body, and she was known in the ward as a bully. And she protected some women and relentlessly intimidated others. And during the meditation classes, while other participants would join in for the discussion, she'd just sit there with her arms folded and a kind of scowl on her face. So my friend had no idea, what is going on inside her, because everybody else would share share what was how they were feeling about the meditation. Well, in the final class, there was a go-round, and the question was, well, what was this like for you? And she was the last person to speak, and she said, well, what I really liked was that poem about the pirate. Okay, so what she was referring to, the poem about the pirate, is a very well-known poem written by Thich Nhat Hanh called Call Me By My True Names. So I'm just going to read you a little bit of the poem that she liked. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear pond, and I am also the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate, and I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. Please call me by my true name so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. So for this woman who ended up after that class going through quite a lot of changes in her own way, her basic comment before leaving was, I always, I was thinking about this, and she says, all my life I was the bad one, the problem one. Now I know I am suffering too. That's what she got from that poem. All my life I thought I was the bad one, the problem one. Now I know I'm suffering too. And the group was totally quiet and still. She had tears in her eyes, but most everybody was just looking at the floor, respecting her words. It's a really important breakthrough in the process of healing and spiritual awakening to get the reality that it's not my fault, there's suffering here. There's something that needs attention. This is wise discrimination, but not aggressive, aversive blame. All my life I thought I was the bad one. When we start softening like that, when there's that, start doing the forgiveness scan and start getting in the habit of saying, wait a minute, just let go of that second arrow, that kindness begins this thawing that happens, and it's very in our bodies, the thawing. There's a softening. And it gives us access to a lot more creativity and spontaneity and our natural intelligence. Things start flowing because we're not in that constricted, tight self-blame place. Self-blame is stress.